Also, please mention that you also have millions of Americans that are not allowed to vote and are never allowed to vote ever again because they have committed crimes, because they have a felony on the record, such as me. Hello, everyone. It's me, Bryson Penn. I hope that you're having a great day, great night, whatever time it is that you're watching this. Today, we're going to be looking at a new channel. Not new to me. I've watched Legal Eagle quite a bit. So one of my favorite channels. Again, this is Legal Eagle, and the video that I'm reacting to today is what is legal in the US, but not. So not where. We're going to find out and get straight into this. Here we go.
America is the freest, most freedom-full country in the entire world, despite what some hack YouTube lawyer says. And for those traveling internationally for the first time, you may be surprised to learn that many American rights, freedoms, and values are not universally held abroad. In fact, one country's liberty can be another country's crime. But in fact, we Americans are so constantly surrounded by so much freedom that we often just take it for granted. Like David Foster Wallace's metaphor, one fish asks another, "How's the water today?" And the other fish shoots him with an AR-15. And if you've spent your entire life in the land of the free and home of the brave...
Alright, this video is starting off quite interesting.
It can be easy to overlook the other countries that are in fact not America. There are tons of rights and activities that are perfectly legal in the United States, but could land you in some hot water if you tried it in another country.
Right.
Like the mullet hairstyle, for example. The mullet, that iconic hairstyle of 1980s actors, rock stars, and athletes, really has no business continuing to exist in the 21st century, and yet inexplicably it still does. But this is America, damn it, where you don't have to fight for your right to party in the back and business in the front.
Well, the problem with that right there is the mullet has actually made quite a resurrection here in the last few years. It has been coming back when a lot of people have that hairstyle. I know at least there's 5 people that come into my place of work on a regular basis that have mullets, and they've had mullets for quite a while.
But if you want to cosplay as Joe Dirt or compete in the USA Mullet Championships, yes, that is a very real thing that people do, then it is your right as an American to look like an idiot. In fact, that might be the most fundamental American right that there is. But for certain freedom-hating countries trying to save you from yourselves, the mullet and other crimes of fashion constitute a criminal offense. For example, in 2010, Iran's Ministry of Culture officially said goodbye to mullets, banning the hairstyle for being un-Islamic. In an effort to rid the country of so-called decadent Western haircuts, Iran launched a crackdown on mullets, elaborate spikes, and long hair, because nothing says decadence like the mullet. Now, in years leading up to the ban, police have actually raided barbershops that offer these disfavored hairstyles. After the ban, violators have been subject to fines and impromptu haircuts by the police for violating these standards. Government officials have even gone to hairdressing trade shows to outline what haircuts are legal. Also, in 2021, North Korea launched its own war against mullets and other foreign styles. In an effort to crack down on so-called non-socialist hairdos, the rogue communist country outlawed mullets and spiky dyed hair, while also enlisting the state-run Socialist Patriotic Youth League to act as literal fashion police against the banned cuts.
I would not have actually, I wouldn't have thought that the mullet would be banned or that these types of haircuts, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I understand completely. I just wouldn't have considered those things because it's just not necessarily in my daily realm of lifestyle.
Nose and lip piercings, skinny jeans, and branded t-shirts were also outlawed. And though this is hardly the worst human rights violation of this repressive regime, seems like Kim Jong-un is in no place to prosecute anyone for ridiculous haircuts. And it's not just hairstyles that don't make the cut, pun 100% intended. In the nation of Tajikistan, the secular government has waged a war on beards in an effort to crack down on what it sees as the influence of Islamic radicalism. In the country, only clean-shaven men can get passports, and beards are often forcibly shaved off by police officers. So if you're a hirsute hipster looking to open up that barbershop just for that ironic beard and mustache, you'll have to look outside of Tajikistan, but obviously you've already set up shop in Williamsburg anyway. But just
Okay, so I definitely think that the beards and the whole haircut thing for Tajikistan, that's definitely more impressive to me than the no mullets and spiky hair and whatnot for North Korea and Iran. Definitely think that the Tajikistan one is higher up here on the scale for me.
Because it's legal to get a really terrible haircut in the United States doesn't mean that you won't be subject to a good spanking. Unless you're outside of the United States. Because when it comes to raising children, there's a fierce debate as to whether parents should spank their kids. Some parents live by the adage, use your words, not your hands, while other parents, particularly those influenced by older generations, live by the biblically inspired aphorism, spare the rod, spoil the child. But
Right.
as a strictly legal matter, here in the grand old US of A, the right to spank your kids shall not be infringed. In fact, the use of corporal punishment on one's own children, defined as spanking, paddling, or other forms of physical punishment to correct misbehavior, is protected by law in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia.
Right. Oh. Oh, look, so now, for those of us whose parents spanked us as kids, oh, I thought it was talking about school. I'll say there's actually a few schools around. So I used to live in the state of Arkansas, and there's actually a couple schools that you can actually, you have to fill out and sign a waiver and send it into the school, but they do still have spanking and paddlings in the elementary schools to this day in some of our states and some of our schools. It's completely legal. Now, I don't know if you all believe in spanking your children or that type of punishments, paddling or whatnot. I definitely believe that there is a mixture somewhere, but there really also plays a lot bigger role in being able to communicate with your children and have. I gotta pause for a second.
For those of us whose parents spanked us as kids, that probably doesn't surprise you. What might surprise you in most of the United States is that it remains perfectly legal for teachers to paddle children in school, and not just in Springfield Elementary School.
Talking on a turn, that's a paddling. Looking out the window, that's a paddling.
In fact, in 1977, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of school spankings. In Ingram versus Wright, the court ruled 5-4 that paddling children in public schools did not violate the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. As a result, the Supreme Court left it up to the states to decide whether to allow spanking in educational settings or to ban it.
Huh?
Oh yeah!
And today, 19 US states still allow public school personnel to use corporal punishment from preschool to the 12th grade. And for private schools, corporal punishment remains legal in every US state except New Jersey and Iowa. But outside the United States, there has been a clear trend, not merely to dissuade parents from spanking children, but to actually make the practice illegal. In 1979, Sweden became the first country to explicitly ban spanking.
Oh.
This was wildly controversial at the time, sparking contentious debate about parental rights versus state responsibilities. And some Swedish headlines at the time included, quote, "Swedes have gone mad and the government takes charge of parenting in Sweden." But over the past 4 decades, the trend against spanking has been on the rise all over parenting in Sweden.
Let's go back. Hang on. It says right here. Other early adopters include Norway, Finland, Austria, and Denmark. In the 1990s, a slew of European countries outlawed the practice, and in 2000, Israel became the first non-European state to ban smacking. So, from what I understand on that, most of you, pretty much all of you who are watching this, especially those that live in the Scandinavian countries where most of you all don't, this is not something that is allowed. This is illegal and not done at all in these countries, correct?
Sweden. But over the past 4 decades, the trend against spanking has been on the rise all over the world. In fact, according to the American Spanking Institute, in conjunction with Mothers for Hand Smacking, I'm just kidding, I made both of those just up. You've got to stay on your toes. No, I mean, according to the Global Initiative to End All Corporal Punishment of Children, a total of 63 countries have made smacking children illegal in any setting, including at home. And countries on this list span 5 continents, and in 2022, Wales became the latest country to ban the practice. And the bans are even more numerous in school settings, with corporal punishment in schools now outlawed in 135 countries.
Oh, you better believe that's a paddling.
Decades after Sweden's ban, anti-spanking advocates can point to hard data that suggests that a direct correlation between spanking bans and better adjusted children. But that being said, the prospect of actually prohibiting spanking at home remains unlikely in the United States, as many consider such a ban to be an oppressive intrusion by the state into parental rights. And even in the 21st century, spanking in the US has its share of high-profile defenders, particularly on the conservative side of the aisle.
I got hit with a strap, bam, bam, bam. And I've never been to a shrink.
In 2014, Fox News commentator Sean Hannity famously defended parents' rights to spank their children, citing his own upbringing by beating the desk with a belt to a confused panel.
I got it like this. And I deserved it. I was a troubled kid.
Now, notwithstanding the views of the obvious...
See, I don't know about that. The whole, like, go outside and get me a switch. If you're not familiar with that term, that is go outside and get a twig or a small limb off of a tree that's flexible and long enough that, you know, you could use as a whip. You know, or getting a paddle and being hit with a piece of wood, different things like that. Using a belt. Those are all unnecessary. I don't feel like that at all. You know, that's not at all okay. Not at all okay.
Obviously well-adjusted commentator who clearly turned out fine, spanking has seen a notable decline in the US. The proportion of parents who utilize the practice has dropped from 50% in 1993 to only 35% in 2017. But look, if you want your children to turn out like Sean Hannity, then maybe start with some spankings. But that takes us to a topic that almost everyone agrees on, and that is cannabis. Because in a nation that seems increasingly divided on almost every single issue, one of the few areas of bipartisan agreement is the embrace of legal marijuana.
Right.
Now, although cannabis remains illegal under federal law, the feds have allowed states to experiment with their own loosened restrictions because, well, I'll let John Mulaney explain that one.
With weed, it was just something we wanted really badly, and we kept asking them for 40 years, like, excuse me. And then suddenly the government became like cool parents, and they're just like, okay, here, take a little. We'd rather you do it in the house than go somewhere else, blah, 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 blah.
But that being said, Customs and Border Patrol works tirelessly to prevent drugs from entering this country. Like the time that they celebrated the interdiction of this massive haul of drugs from entering American shores. Thank you for your service! But as of 2022, recreational marijuana is currently legal in 18 states, DC, and Guam. 31 states plus DC have decriminalized low-level offenses, and a whopping 37 states allow it for medical use.
Now, I'm sure that this won't be mentioned in this video, but let me take this further for you, okay? So, in all 50 states, in the entire United States, it is legal to grow hemp. You know, you can grow hemp all you want as long as the Delta 9 THC is less than 3%, I believe, or like 0.3%. It's one of those two. So as long as that, so we grow it for a lot of industrial uses. However, over the last couple of years, because of technology and labs and all these different chemicals and finding different ways to extract things from plants, you now have Delta 8, Delta 10. Basically, they have found all these other chemicals in the marijuana plant that gets you high without the actual psychoactive mind-altering effects of the Delta 9 itself. So now, in all 50 states, you could pretty much go to any gas station, you can go to all kinds of smoke shops and all that, and you can buy hemp flower. You could buy it, you know, just right there. You could buy vape cartridges, you could buy edibles, and a lot of it, like, you could buy a giant cookie, and as long as that cookie is less than 0.3%, or less than 3% Delta 9, it's fine. But if the cookie weighs, you know, 3 ounces, well, 3% of that is a lot. So we found all kinds of ways around it. And you can pretty much get high anywhere, any place, and it's perfectly legal as long as it's not got the Delta 9 in it. I mean, at that point, you have 37 states that allow it for medical use. You have all these other states that allow it for recreation use. You have all these different laws and regulations and fines and people incarcerated. You have all this different stuff, but yet at the same time, as long as you don't have this one chemical in it, you can buy it and smoke it and do whatever you want with it. You might as well just make it legal and be done with it and stop wasting everyone's time and money and tax and everything else. Just, you know, it's either we are or we aren't. That's the way it should be. Just adding that in there.
With public support for full legalization standing at a record 68%, Americans certainly have come a long way since the days of reefer madness.
Innocently they dance. innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell.
But try to take that wacky tobacco outside of our borders and you could find yourself in severe legal jeopardy. In fact, in a handful of countries, possession of cannabis could have you staring down a hangman's noose. And this disparate legal treatment of cannabis abroad was recently put on display following a high-profile detention in Putin's Russia. In February 2022, US women's basketball superstar Brittany Griner was arrested after customs authorities claimed to have found a cannabis vape oil cartridges in her carry-on bag.
Yeah. And I was going to mention Brittany Griner's case because I wasn't sure how old this particular video is, but he did it for us, so no harm, no foul.
But given that Griner's arrest came days before Russia invaded Ukraine, some have speculated that the Kremlin arrested Ms. Griner to pressure the US and others to not stand in the way of Putin's invasion. To that point, Russia has been known to falsify drug charges against critics in the past, so it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that the same happened here. I guess she should just consider herself lucky that she wasn't poisoned with a radioactive substance. But while a few dozen countries have relaxed restrictions on the plant, the recreational and medical use of cannabis remains very illegal in the vast majority of nations. For example, in 2021, 24-year-old British soccer coach Billy Hood was arrested in the United Arab Emirates with 4 bottles of CBD vape oil in his car. Local authorities charged Mr. Hood with drug trafficking and then sentenced him to 25 years in a Dubai prison. Mr. Hood's sentence was then reduced to 10 years on appeal, but he remains incarcerated. In 2013, Egypt executed Charles Raymond Ferndale, a 74-year-old British citizen, for allegedly smuggling 3 tons of hashish, which Ferndale insisted until his death that he had been tricked into doing by third parties. In 2021, Singapore sentenced Omar Yaqub Bamadhaj to death for bringing at least 2 pounds of cannabis into the country in 2018. And like Ferndale, his lawyers also argued he did not knowingly bring drugs into the country. Though despite America's comparatively looser pot restrictions, America still has over 40,000 people in jail for marijuana offenses, something that absolutely requires fixing. And even with these disparities, at the very least though, toking up the United States will not result in the death sentence. But it's something that you can change in America because you have the right to vote. But you also have the right to not vote if you don't want to, because while millions of Americans stand up every election day to have their voices heard, millions of Americans also choose to sit down, stay home, and deliberately not vote at all.
If I were registered to vote, I'd send these clowns a message by staying home on election day and dressing up like a clown.
Now, also please mention that you also have millions of Americans that are not allowed to vote and are never allowed to vote ever again because they have committed crimes, because they have a felony on the record, such as me, because I did some stupid things years ago and ended up getting, a felony charge for it, everything else. I did my time. I've paid my restitutions. I've done everything. I have a great job. I have a fairly good life. I'm very happy with where I'm at in my life right now. But I'm not allowed to vote. I'm not allowed to have any say-so whatsoever about any public official and put my name on a ballot to try and vote for them because I've had my voting rights stripped away from me for the rest of my life. So add that in there too.
Now, it might seem obvious to say that you have the right not to participate in American elections, but it might surprise you to learn that staying home on election day is actually illegal in over 24 countries. That's right, in 27 countries, all eligible citizens are required by law to register and vote in every single election. Though several countries like Chile, Italy, and the Dominican Republic that previously adopted mandatory voting have since abandoned the practice. A handful of countries with compulsory voting don't actually enforce any penalty for failure to vote, like Bulgaria, Costa Rica, and Mexico, but over a dozen countries enforce a penalty for failing to vote in elections. Some countries penalize non-voters with outright disenfranchisement. In Singapore, a voter that misses an election is removed from voting rolls and must re-register and submit a valid reason for not voting. Other countries issue fines and can even result in jail time. Brazil requires all eligible citizens, excluding the illiterate, voters aged 16 and 17, and those aged 70, to vote or be subject to a fine of less than $1. In Australia, citizens are legally required to go to their polling place, but can choose to decline to participate after signing in. However, failure to show up at the polling place at all can subject Aussies to a fine of 100 didgeridoos. probably, or the equivalent of 14 to 34 US dollars, and citizens who repeatedly refuse to pay the small fine can actually go to jail. Among countries with compulsory voting laws, there are those that tie voting directly to your pocketbook. For example, in Peru, a voter must have a stamped voting card to obtain certain services and goods from some public offices. And in Bolivia, a voter is given a card to prove participation, and a citizen who cannot show proof of voting within 3 months after the election will be ineligible to receive a salary from the bank. Advocates for this compulsory system liken the democratic participation to civil responsibilities like taxation, jury duty, and military service, and argue that participating in democracy is a duty instead of a right. Others argue that forcing people to vote compels higher voter turnout, as Australia rarely falls below 90% participation, while Brazil's most recent presidential election was just below 80%. And compare that to the United States, where voter turnout struggles to crack 50% in a midterm election and only occasionally breaks 60% in presidential contests.
But yet, I'm sure you would have a lot more people who would vote if they were allowed to vote. I would vote. Especially after having my rights to vote stripped away and not being allowed to vote in the last couple of elections. Like, I honestly, it bothers me that I'm not allowed, because I think it's, we're not gonna say that. It really bothers me that, because it's silly, that because of something, well, let's just fast forward. So 30 years from now, whenever I'm in my 60s, because of something I did at that point, whenever like 40 years ago, well, something you did 40 years ago, you still have no say-so in who the president of the United States is. You still have no say-so and not allowed to vote for who the mayor of your city. You're still not allowed to vote for the sheriff of your county. You're still not allowed to vote for the governor of your state because of something you did 40 years ago. How is that right and fair?
However, the idea of forcing people to vote and punishing them for non-participation is not a popular concept among nations with voluntary suffrage. Critics see voting as a civic right rather than a duty, and contend that forcing someone to vote is counter to the very idea of liberty and free choice. And some American legal scholars contend that mandatory voting laws would constitute compelled speech that violates the First Amendment, as the right to speak necessarily involves the freedom not to speak. So as long as you live in the United States, you can rest assured of your constitutional right to say none of the above.
The only thing that's silly is the power of the people's vote. And I think the people should use it to vote for none of the above.
Now, if you want to see even more dumb criminals...
Okay, so that was the Legal Eagle channel and things that are legal in the United States but not in other countries. Some interesting things. Of course, there's way, way, way more than what we talked about just in this video. This is only just a few examples of things. Of course, there's so many different laws and regulations and everything like that from country to country and nation to nation. But it just gives you an example, and it's something good for us to react to, and definitely gives you a little bit more insight to some of our laws and just how we differ and maybe why we differ in the ways that we do. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope that you have a great day, great night, whatever time it is that you see this. It's me, Bryson P. Goodbye.